Hello S1 and welcome to your first lesson on witchcraft. Now in your jotter, if you could write down the heading Witchcraft in the 17th century. Now what we're going to aim to do in this lesson today is to examine stereotypes of witches and to explore why certain people believed there were witches. Now firstly, what is witchcraft? Now in your jotters, what I'd like you to do is to write a bullet point list or a mind map with everything you know about witchcraft. So if you pause the video just for a couple of minutes and either bullet point list or mind map with everything you know about witchcraft. Now according to the Britannic Encyclopedia, witchcraft is the exercise or invocation of alleged supernatural powers to control people or events, and practices typically involving sorcery or magic. So that's what the Britannic Encyclopedia actually refers to witchcraft as. So witchcraft ultimately involves sorcery and magic and people using this to make things happen, ultimately to control people or certain events. Now, in Britain in the 16th and 17th century, people were very, very afraid of witches because they thought that witches got their evil from the devil. Now, although this was very, very common in Britain, it was also taking place in other parts of the world and in other parts of Europe as well. But in Britain in particular, people were very, very afraid of witches. If people couldn't explain why something bad had happened, then the person would be a witch that would be blamed ultimately. Now, in your jotter, what I'd like you to try and do is to draw your own version of a witch. So again, I'd like you to pause the video at this point to draw your own version of a witch. Try and label the key features on your drawing. Now, have a think if you had any of the following features. So you might have had, for example, a pointed hat. You might have had a black cat beside your witch. You might have had a broomstick. You might have had your witch having long fingers, a long crooked nose, a wand, a cauldron, or have your witch wearing all black. Now, in the media, witches are portrayed quite a bit. Now, what I'd like you to think about next is how witches are represented in the media. So think about TV, think about film, think about theatre. What I'd like you to try and do is to create a mind map of as many famous examples of witches or TV and film or plays which feature witches. So in the middle of your jotter, you write witches on TV and try and write down as many as you can. Now, witches in the media. What do these witches maybe have in common? Well, if you look closely, a lot of the witches in the media here are portrayed. We've got cauldrons, we have long hair, we have the colour black that's used quite a bit. But if we think about some of these witches here, some are maybe still are stereotypical witches with the pointed black hats, but we also have other witches there that maybe aren't your stereotypical witches. What may we describe as nicer witches compared to more evil witches, for example. So that was a wee bit on witches and the stereotypical view of witches and how they actually looked. Now what we're going to look at next is how people actually identified what a witch actually was. So again, in the middle of your jotters, what I'd like you to do is to draw this mind map which says how to identify a witch. We're going to go over some pictures and add in some notes around our mind map about how people actually identified what a witch was. Now the first way that people identified what a witch was if the witch was apparently riding a devil. So this image here is supposed to be portraying a witch riding a devil. Okay, and that's how people worked out that it was a witch. Stories would be passed around towns and centres to say that this person was spotted riding a devil, so they must be a witch. Another way that a witch was spotted is if they were caught flying. So it was believed that some people would maybe be seen flying, and to explain that, that would mean that they would be a witch. Another way would be flying, but this time flying with the devil. So again, people would be, maybe stories would be passed around about people flying on broomsticks and beside the devil, so they must be witches. A fourth way that people would be identified as a witch if they were seen near crops that were then destroyed. So if crops went on fire, for example, or if they were ruined, or if they failed to grow properly, and a person was spotted nearby them, they could well be blamed for those crops, failing and destroying those crops, so they could be a witch. There's also stories of people being identified as witches. They were caught dancing in woods with the devil as well. So again, this image portrays here women in the woods, and there's a devil there. So dancing with the devil would be another way of identifying a witch. And another way of identifying a witch was potion making. So if any people were caught making potions, then that could be a way of identifying that they were a witch. So that's the 6 main ways that people were identified. So we have riding the devil, flying with the devil, destroying crops, dancing with the devil in woods, or making potions. Now, if we think about the images that we just saw there, what do these images actually tell us about attitudes towards witchcraft? And were there any common themes? What were they that you maybe saw in the image? Now, hopefully you identify one of the most common themes in the images was that the people being accused of being witches were usually women. And this was very, very common at this time, that women would be accused of witchcraft. Also, some of the ways of identifying a witch, you might look at now and think that seems a bit exaggerated, to think that people could be caught flying, for example. It's not possible. Or to be dancing in the woods with devils. But some of these ways of identifying witches, nowadays we look back and think, well, that's maybe a bit exaggerated, but at the time, that's the sort of stories that were passed around and progressed around. Now, just to check up to see where we are and what we have covered. So we have looked at stereotypes of witches, so how witches look, how witches dress. We're going to now look in more detail at why certain people believed there were witches. And we've looked at some of the stereotypes in terms of what certain witches would be accused of doing. So our next aim is to explore why certain people believed there were witches. So, why did people actually think witches existed at all? Now, life in the 17th century in medieval society was very, very different to today. People were a lot less educated, so they didn't have maybe science to look at for answers. People were also less knowledgeable about events and about life in general, so it was easy to blame people like witches for certain things happening, as opposed to using science or other methods to explain why something had happened. Science and medicine were not advanced at all at this time, so again, it was people going off of other people's opinions. Life was very simple in the 17th century medieval times, and anything out of the ordinary was viewed as very strange. People at this time as well were very, very superstitious. They had beliefs which made them very, very superstitious. Now, what do people think witches could actually do? Now, people actually thought witches could do supernatural things. They could make storms, they could cause plagues or crops to fail, and people did not know the real reasons for these things actually happening. They thought it was witches. They also felt that witches could fly on broomsticks, and that they could sail on the sea in a sieve. So that was some of the things that they believed that witches could do. Now, an extension task here to think about: why might natural disasters cause many people to really accuse others of witchcraft? Now, we've got here a picture which says a witch creating a storm at sea. Now, witch hunting was most common when natural disasters occurred. So when we had things like floods or poor harvests or droughts or anything that caused any sort of unexplained deaths, it was witches that were accused of doing this. Nowadays, we obviously have science to prove why certain natural disasters happen. However, at this time, medieval times, it was witches that were blamed. So think about why natural disasters might have caused people to accuse others of witchcraft. Think about the fact that society wasn't as advanced as we are today. So again, just to check up, we've now looked at stereotypes of witches, so what witches look like, why they would be accused of being witches, and why certain people believed there were witches. Now your next task is a creative task. What we'd like to do is to think of a way of informing people how to identify a witch. Now, what you think about what we've covered in this lesson in terms of the types of behaviours that might be associated with witches, so things like dancing with the devil in woods, potion making, flying. Some of the ways you could do this task, this creative task, is you could make a poem to inform people of how to identify a witch. You could make a nursery rhyme, you can make a pamphlet, a leaflet, a poster. It's up to you what you want to do. Now once you've completed this task, what we'd like you to do is to take a picture of this and to upload this via your team on Microsoft Teams. If you choose to do this on like a Word document, for example, you can upload this to your Microsoft team under the Assignments tab. And the very last part of this lesson is a plenary, just to recap what we have learned. So in your jotters, what we'd like to do is to draw your brain, so draw an outline of your brain, then fill it with 2 common features which are stereotypically linked to witches, and one reason why people believed in witches. Thank you for listening to this lesson. Once you've completed this work, as we said, if you upload your creative task via the Assignments tab on Microsoft Teams, if you have any questions at all, then just ask your class teacher via Teams. Thank you.